Deanna Harshbarger, thank you so much for joining the Investor Podcast today, sponsored by Natera Ventures. We're really excited to have you. Deanna Harshbarger, you are the CEO of Cala Health. Great to have you on the podcast. I'd love to kind of kick things off with just an overview about your background and what got you to Cala.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. So I can start with, depends on how far back you want to go. So back in the day,
as far back as you want to go.
I won't tell you how many years back, but back in the day. So I actually started out my career as a chemical engineer. So,
really?
Yes.
Okay.
So my background is and it wasn't in research, it was in manufacturing.
Interesting.
So I used to spend my time in large chemical plants in steel-toed boots and a hard hat, doing processing engineering. Had a lot of fun doing that. But at one point in my life, I said, I'm not sure this is what I want to do long term. Not that I don't love a good chemical plant.
Who doesn't? Sounds awesome.
So I decided to, go on to graduate school. And what I had really loved when I was working with customers. And having worked in the chemical industry, I really wanted to, at the end of the day, do something fulfilling and feel as though I was giving back to the world. And so that was, I got bit by the healthcare bug. And postgraduate school, I spent my career actually over the past more than 20 years in the healthcare space, and in particular in the medical device space. And I absolutely loved device because it's something that's very tangible. And I've loved seeing the evolution over time of what the definition of device, now med tech, really is. So I was lucky enough to spend time at what I like to call all the majors as a graduating ground. So I spent time in interventional cardiology and a significant amount of time in deep brain stimulation. And then prior to coming over to Cala, I spent time in the diabetic space in glucose monitors,
very cool.
And also insulin pens. And what was really fascinating was seeing this evolution of a device that would go in a procedure, a single-use device, to this active with a patient all the time, being able to understand how the patient is doing and being able to treat. And I think that's something that is really changed over time. You thought of things as either a single use or sit in body, but never this interaction. And if you think about diseases, they don't stay the same, right? And it's unique to every single patient. And so I just absolutely love that, thinking that, this is where the future of medicine and healthcare really is it's in this space where you can help the patient. And if you have context of what's going on with the patient, you can help the patient better. And I got a call from Cala Health, and I was quite excited because I had spent over a decade working in deep brain stimulation. And in that space, you are treating patients with movement disorders. But what I saw was so many patients not having great treatment options, and then getting to the point of deep brain stimulation, which gives you phenomenal results. But that's a lot to go through.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I'm going to drill a hole in your head. I'm going to stick an electrode in your brain. That is really scary for many people. And that goes to tell you, one, how effective it is. But two, what I saw was the majority of the patients just would not get there. They would hear about it, but that was not something that they personally wanted to go through. And as you think about the evolution of a movement disorder over time, it gets worse. You're getting older. That also makes it harder to undergo a surgery or any type of procedure. And so when I got a call from Cala, I was extremely excited because I thought, this is amazing. Somebody thought about how you could treat patients with movement disorders but not have to go through a procedure. And we have an amazing founder. Her name is Kate Rosenbluth. And we laugh because we were in the space around the same time, and we probably were in some DBS cases together and never saw each other.
That's wild. That's wild.
and I told her, I was like, I sat in those cases and I never thought about, how can you do this with not having to do this? And that's exactly what she was thinking about. And I saw the clinical evidence that Cala had and said, this works. And having worked in the neurostimulation space for so long, what we really see is there is this opportunity to treat so many disease states by affecting different areas of the body through the different systems. And the answer is electricity. So I was extremely excited to join Cala, and I joined almost four years ago.
Isn't it amazing? Electricity is such a foundation to a lot of innovation. It's sort of analogous to what we're doing at Natera around cold plasma, right? So we've our core business is a spark plug, which makes hot plasma. And part of our investment thesis, just a portion of it, is around, could you make cold plasma and then apply that into medicine for therapeutic purposes, right? And part of the reason we invested in Cala is we're very bullish on the neuromodulation space and very bullish on electricity as medicine. And I just love that. I love sort of boiling it down to very simple physics and kind of iterating from there, right? And I think you said something really interesting in your description. You said diseases don't stay the same, right? And I think about that a lot because part of our investment strategy is exploring precision medicine, right? How do you, so diseases don't stay the same, no person's the same. How do you define precision medicine in the world that you live in?
Yes. So what we do at Cala, how we treat patients is we measure the patient's tremor and use that to individualize their therapy. And I think that is really important. One is, in particular, what we're treating today in a movement disorder, that changes. It's different by patient. For patients, it's different in each hand. They have hands where each hand is different. And it's a neurodegenerative disease. And it gets
worse over time. Yeah.
Patients don't stay the same. So we individualize the therapy for each patient. And I think, again, going back to what we've seen, this evolution in med tech and being able to gather information from the patient and have that and use that, look at that context to figure out how do you actually treat that patient. And then you're going to be able to get a better outcome. So I think that piece is very, very important. And I think part of the way our systems are set up today, something that you had mentioned to me earlier, was just thinking about on the broader scale of like regulation, how devices are treated, how they are paid for, this evolution of being able to sense and then treat. I don't think the systems were thought about in that way. But I think what you know, and you see more broadly in the industry, is this is the better way to treat patients and the better way to get outcomes. Because historically, you're taking a snapshot in time and saying, this is where you are with your disease right now. And so I'm going to give you this singular treatment. And, gosh, I hope that works for you over the next few years. And
it's not a one size fits all. Like this is not right. So back to your earlier point, it's about delivering individualized therapy, right? And also changing it over time as the disease progresses, right?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So today, the focus of Cala is across a wide array of therapeutic areas. You've expanded tremendously since I invested in the company when I was at Qualcomm Ventures DRX Capital. I remember it was just focusing on essential tremor, which I know very well. My mom has essential tremor, so it's something she tells me about a lot, and so it's a personal there's a personal tie to it. But you're doing so much more now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So from those early days, our focus right now is on movement disorders as a whole, but we
Very
did
cool.
receive our indication for Parkinson's disease as well.
Awesome.
Able to treat the action tremor that a patient has with Parkinson's. And
What is an action tremor? Sorry, just for the
yeah,
listeners out there that aren't as familiar.
it's really, you hear people talk about as well too, intention tremor. So it is the tremor that occurs, for example, if I am reaching for a glass, I am doing something, and that is that particular tremor. There are all different types of tremor. For example, a Parkinson's patient has a lot of what we call resting tremor, which is if
Mhm.
you're just sitting there, then the tremor is there. Versus if you are taking an action or have an intent to do something, then that's when the tremor comes out.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. That's helpful. So you okay? So it's movement disorders more broadly, essential tremor and Parkinson's, which I think quite frankly makes total sense to me. The adjacencies are there. In your mind, movement disorders more broadly. How big is that market? How big is that market? And it's presumably a global play here, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So when we first look at the United States alone, essential tremor, there are 7 to 10 million essential tremor patients within the US and approximately 1 million with Parkinson's. And so that alone is a huge market. And then you are looking at, for Parkinson's, for example, it's approximately 12 million global, and essential tremor, multi millions. I don't have the exact number on
A lot.
with the
Yeah.
tremor, but it is very, very broad.
Mhm.
And I think what's difficult in particular for these patients, so if we look at essential tremor alone, the treatment options for those patients are limited. So they typically start out on pharmacotherapy. And the good news is when that works for them early on in their disease, it works well, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. And so they start out on pharmacotherapy, but as we mentioned before, the disease is neurodegenerative. So it gets worse and worse over time. And so with those drugs, patients then need to increase the dosing of those drugs to be able to address their tremor as it gets worse and worse over time. And the unfortunate aspect is the majority of the time, many of those patients, almost half of them, will hit a point where they will end up being either contraindicated for those medications, or the dosing is so high to treat the tremor that the side effects are so debilitating that no longer take the medications. And then the alternative options that they have at that point really are either focused ultrasound or deep brain stimulation. And they're fantastic alternatives, but the majority of the time, many patients do not want to go through any type of procedure. And so you just
Interesting.
large swath of patients that either end up being undertreated or not treated at all. And that's
Interesting.
disappointing.
That's really unfortunate. Yeah.
It really is. When you think about how advanced we are as a civilization, that you have one massive disease state like that, where the majority of the patients are either undertreated or untreated, that's rare. And not great.
It's unacceptable. Yeah. Yeah. And you're addressing it head on. Can people get used to it? So obviously everyone knows you take drugs, you have to keep increasing the dose because your body kind of like gets used to it, and there you develop a tolerance, right, for the drug. Is it similar for electricity as medicine, or is it a different phenomena?
Yeah. So with our treatment, with our Cala therapy, it's not. There's no habituation.
Cool. Very cool.
We've studied patients out to 3+ years. So we have clinical data for over 2,000 patients.
Yeah.
And so you don't see that. And so that's actually a very good thing. So the outcomes that we see with the patients that first start utilizing Cala therapy is the same that they get, 3 years out when they're still using Cala therapy. And And just to give a little bit of context to what this does for patients, and you have personal experience with this then, as you mentioned, the hand tremor makes it difficult to do things that we take for granted. So, initially people say, oh, it's just a tremor in my hand. It's small. It's no big deal. I'll manage. But when you think about what do you do every morning? You get dressed. It's extremely difficult. Can you imagine putting your arms through a sweater, into the arm of the sweater, but anything, even getting it over your head as you're putting a shirt on, and then try and brush your teeth, and then sit down and try and have your coffee, and bring that cup to your mouth. What we hear from our patients, it gets me every time and makes me so grateful that I get to do this every day. When they tell me I haven't been able to go out to eat in 5 years because I'm tossing food all over the place. People stare at me all the time and I can't get any of it into my mouth. There's a significant amount of depression, isolation that occurs with essential tremor, and to be able to give people their dignity back is so rewarding. So I'm a lucky person.
Amazing. I absolutely love it. I was looking a little bit further back into your background, and you've done so many impressive things. Have you always worked on direct to patient applications, or have you spent any time in consumer? I thought I read some of your experience on the consumer side. Can you talk a little bit about that transition and what that's been like?
Yeah. So the majority has been on the physician patient side. On the direct to consumer side, it was a combination of mainly actually in the diabetic space.
Okay.
And so yeah. So still on the medical side. But I think that is a very different view than what someone thinks about, for example, when you are creating a device that goes in a procedure and is implanted by a physician. I think the unique aspect of wearable really is this is something that the patient interacts with day in and day out. Something that's sitting inside their body. And so the criticality of that is, one, making sure that you are creating something that makes it easy for them to use. Just think about, the hurdle, the barrier that would exist there if it's something that's really difficult to do. I was joking with a friend the other day that I couldn't order something online and I'd have to actually go into a store.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a barrier. That's a hurdle. And think about, how hard it is for us to incorporate simple things into our life that we know we need to do. 10 to 15 minutes of exercise a day. Do I really get to that? No.
Yeah.
Because there's a hurdle that exists for me to do that. And when you think about treating patients, you have to be able to make it very easy for them to do. When you even think about pharmacotherapy and what you see from a compliance standpoint with patients, and that's just popping a pill into your mouth with a glass of water, how difficult that is. When you think about the fact that you are doing something for a patient that they have to physically put on, to make that really simple for them. And that's why, for example, we took that mindset. I mean, Cala really thought about what is the life of a tremor patient and how to incorporate that into their existing lifestyle. So when you think about ours, it looks like a watch. And from an ability to put it on, we had to make it very simple because this is pre-treatment. So their tremor is there. And so how you make it very simple to put on, from a usage standpoint, big button. Very, very easy to just be able to push the button so they can start to get their therapy. And you have to think about that in the context of a tremor patient. It's hard to push a tiny little button when you're is shaking. So from my background, it's really been more on the medical side. I use that same type of thought process when I worked in the diabetic space.
In the diabetic space, got it. Very cool, very cool. And then the the wearable itself, just to unpack that a little bit. So patient wears it. I mean, is it something they have to wear the entire day? Do they wear it a few times a day? What does the sort of course of therapy look like for patient to most take advantage of the therapy itself to live a normal life?
Yes. So we tried to make it as easy as possible. And again, that's why it looks like a watch. So if they want to wear it all day, they can wear it all day. And the simplicity of it is they can do a therapy session, which is when it is stimulating at any point in time during the day that they want. And it doesn't take long for the therapy to take effect. And so, we recommend to people, a couple things. One is, get consistent with a schedule, like just like in the morning when you get up and, I grab my Apple Watch and put that on. And, if you're getting ready for breakfast and you want to make sure that you have, steadiness in your hands to be able to have breakfast, then go ahead and do that simulation session then. So we set it up so it's very easy for the patient to fit into their lifestyle and whenever they need it and want it.
Very cool. That's awesome. No, it's impressive stuff. One last question about your background here. So you actually joined Cala as the head of product, which I find fascinating. How has your product background shaped your approach as a CEO? And then how do you balance kind of product-led thinking with the complex regulatory and clinical landscape that you're operating in?
Right. So with the product mindset, it should be anything that is easy for the patient, the physician, and regulatory doesn't always agree with that.
Fair enough.
Which is, but that is where we really want to get to. And so I think that transition has really been, the team laughs at me because they're like, we know this is like one of your favorite areas. I'm like, I know, but that's, I've got other things to focus on.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
But it is ensuring that we keep the patient and the physician always in mind and saying, how do we make this easy for both of them? And so I think that is important when we think about the broader view of where we want to go with Cala and what we want to do, because in order to treat as many patients as possible, we need to make sure that it's easy. And then balancing that with, I would say it becomes both a regulatory view. There are requirements you need to be able to ensure that, what you're getting from an outcome standpoint meets the critical needs of whether it is an FDA clearance or whatever it is we're trying to get through from an approval standpoint. But I don't think it changes too much. It's more of, on a product side, you'd want to move faster always, and regulatory always slows you down from that standpoint. I do think one of the advantages that we have is, we're a class 2 device. And so it's a lot easier to make changes versus when I worked in, an implantable space, in class 3. So I do think there's a lot more that's a little bit easier with this device level versus.
So the classifications here, I just, for some of the listeners that may not have a background, class 1 is like a Band-Aid, right? Or a contact lens, right?
Yeah.
And then class 3 is an implantable. Class 2 is what? How would you describe class 2?
Gosh.
Provides clinical efficacy, but doesn't require like some type of implantation or anything like that. Is that generally how it? Okay.
Yeah, it's not anything that's an implant. You definitely need clinical evidence associated with it. You want RCTs as well too. So you have to
it's the sweet spot, I think, right? It's the sweet spot. It's where you want to play. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, but the timelines are different, typically different approval timelines, because you're not looking at, usually the outcomes from a study standpoint aren't as long as you would typically see from an implantable, because you need that time to look at the safety.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's super cool. You've had a tremendous background. Cool that you started as a chemical engineer. Was there a, call it a defining moment for you where you realized you really want to work at the intersection of healthcare and technology? What sort of, what was that one? If you had to name a defining moment, what was it?
I would say that was when I did get into deep brain stimulation.
Awesome.
So when I was in interventional cardiology, it was fantastic at the era of drug-eluting stents, very fascinating, but you don't get to really see the outcome. It's not as tangible. For example, when I was in the OR watching an implant and basically listening to neurons firing in the brain while they determined, did we get it in the right spot within the brain?
Wow.
And to me, that was, my goodness, look at what we're doing. We're actually listening to neurons in the brain.
That's cool. That's pretty cool.
It's working because when the patient is moving their hand, you're hearing the neurons fire in that pattern. And to me, this is really something where you have to be advancing technology to make this even easier, right? And so I think that first point was there. I absolutely loved that. And then the next was when I was working in CGM. And then tying that to the interaction of the patient with the device and being able to realize that if I can give real-time data to this patient, they can manage their disease. You're almost giving them an easy button to manage their disease state. And I think that is very different. They're in control, but you're making it easy for them to do that. And the only way we can do that is through technology. You have to send that data up to the cloud. You have to be able to get that data right back down to adjust whatever treatment you are providing for that patient. And I think that was the next step where I said, okay, I need to be in connected device because that is how we get better outcomes for patients. And Cala was that perfect piece.
I love it. I love it. How do you, this is really interesting because I was having a conversation with one of the founders of a CGM company that we invested in. And we got into this discussion about how much data is too much and what are the sort of moral and ethical implications of that. Do you have a thought process around this with, let's start with like maybe the doctor, right? The doctor, and then obviously there's the patient or the consumer, but how do you thread the needle here with the doctor, right? This is a new modality, right?
It is. The way I think about it is, yes, you could collect boatloads of data and start mining that. I think it really becomes, what is an actionable outcome that you can take from that data that benefits either physician or patient, ideally both. And so I do believe there is some discovery or characterization that typically has to occur where you're then collecting more data than what you need at that point. But you do that to understand the trends. You want to look for causality, right? To say this action is causing this outcome, and I want to change that outcome, and then what data do I need to send to be able to change that outcome? So yes, I think there's an ethical question to that, depending on what you're doing with that data. But if you are using that to benefit and get a better treatment for the patient, or make it easier for the physician to do an interaction that's needed to benefit the patient, then I think that always wins.
Interesting. How about the patient itself? What sort of data do you present to the patient, presumably to educate them on their disease, maybe the disease progression? How do you sort of balance that?
Yes. So one, I think, is understanding what's already in the mind share of that patient. So And I think you look at it differently depending on what the disease state is. So, for example, probably when you were talking to the person that was in the diabetic space, when you're thinking about insulin pump, a diabetic patient, their mind is full because every decision that they're making has an effect on their health. And there, when you think about, and we did this too when I worked in CGM, you only want to serve up what is valuable to them. You don't want to force 30 other decisions that they need to make that day.
Fair enough.
So, and I think that's where you balance what's valuable for them. One, you want them to see, is their therapy working well for them or not? Because they also want to make decisions about their actions that they take and how that affects them. If you take a tremor patient, for example, your tremor patients typically know what triggers some of their tremor as well, too, right? A lot of times that can be fear, anxiety. We have a patient that is an attorney and has to go and litigate. And
oh, wow.
that patient told us, I use your therapy when I'm in the courtroom because that triggers my tremor. And that, and so you want to be able to feed data to the patient that they can use and find actionable. And so, for example, when you think about a tremor patient, they would want to know what their tremor looks like at different times because they can probably tie that to what's going on in their life and what outcome they got if they had therapy at that time too.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, no, it's Cala is both, it's a medical device, it's also a wearable. How do you think about the design and the emotional experience of using a medical device daily? And what considerations did you put into motion around that?
Yes. So what I think is really interesting, I think going back to, and again, this is like some of my product background as well.
Yes.
Really want to think about what fits into the life of the patient. And tremor patients in particular, when we hear from them, what they consider as some of their worst experiences is when they're out in public and their tremor gets worse. And then people staring at them actually makes their tremor even worse. It's getting unwanted attention. And so when we thought about the design of Cala, and you saw this, that, Cala's been around for a little while. We've been around for a decade. Kate founded all the way back in 10 years ago. And the evolution of our product as well, too, was really to make it so that it's discreet. There's a reason that it looks like a watch because you don't necessarily, other people don't need to know that that's a medical device. If you want to share that, you can. You think about that in the CGM space as well, too. There's a reason that sensors get tinier and tinier and unnoticeable because people don't want to call that out. They don't want to be associated with their disease. You don't want to say, hi, I'm Deanna, I'm tremor. Right?
Sure.
It's like,
I am not my tremor.
I am doing other things that you can identify with me. It's my disease. So the discrete was one. And then the other piece really is how simple is it? Because again, your mind is full. You have to deal with enough already because you have a chronic disease. Why put other decision points on there that don't need to be there? So something very, very simple from a design standpoint.
That's very cool. That's really helpful, and it's great that folks like yourself are leading the charge on that, because I know that the disease itself, or the condition, right? Let's not call it a disease. The condition itself is very, very emotional. It has an emotional toll. It affects, like you said, you mentioned earlier, affects your activities of daily living and sometimes your ability to execute on those. And so you want something that just really fits into the patient's lifestyle, and having seen it, having worn it myself, I think it's spot on. It's a great product. I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. You were talking a little bit about the regulatory strategy, and we talked earlier before the podcast about things that need to change in the medtech industry to accommodate this progressive cohort of technologies, right? So can you talk a little bit about what do you think how does the medtech industry need to evolve to better support evidence-based digital therapy and neuromodulation?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the key aspects is one is how you look at it from a clearance standpoint. So what data is required for clearance? You look at, which are very logical and important things, looking at safety and efficacy. I think as you get more advanced from a device standpoint and you are bringing in this digital aspect and going back, what data are you collecting and how are you using that data? I think that's an important view that needs to be looked at when you think about what has to get an approval. How does that data affect the outcome and how much are you collecting? And right now it's looked at as a final, it's almost like you're just crossing a line, saying, okay, we're going to treat tremor and here's the outcome on the tremor side. I think, when Cala came to market, and this is pre my time at Cala from an approval standpoint, doing the very first study, the question was, what are we actually going to measure as an outcome?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What are the endpoints, right?
Yes, we are a wearable device. And so there are certain scales that you certainly can look at, but it really had to be a parsing of looking at some of those scales and saying, well, this applies and this doesn't apply because we're a totally different therapy. And I think it's harder when you're paving the way. And that was from the approval standpoint. And then the next standpoint was from the reimbursement standpoint as well.
Yeah.
The Cala had to get new codes created because what was originally sitting there, we're the only non-invasive neurostim that got new codes created.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible.
Of treatment. And it's because nobody thought about different ways that you would treat a patient. And then they try and put as much as they can, is try and put as many groups into one code as possible. But it takes a significant amount of effort from a research standpoint, setting up very safe data collection and databases. And when you have a true connected device, the security that needs to go with that to be able to protect the patient and their data, that's an infrastructure that has to go into place. And that's costly. The other aspect is we're durable medical equipment. And so, we ship directly to the patient. We do, for example, for our patients, we are filing the claims for our patients because we're durable medical equipment. And so again, infrastructure that's associated with that as well, too. And I think that along both the regulatory and reimbursement pathways, it's a more advanced world now, and it takes a lot more infrastructure and effort and cost to be able to do those pieces. And I don't think that those are, historically thought about. If you are creating, doing a 510K and everything else is already created, then there's certainly a lower cost associated with that. But from an innovation standpoint, there have to be better ways to innovate and to be able to allow, there are so many potential great treatments that can exist, but getting across that regulatory pathway hurdle and that reimbursement hurdle is expensive. And we're not set up for that. We're set up for the Me Too's.
Yeah. The reimbursement code piece, just for listeners that aren't as privy to the medtech industry, and we have actually quite a few that are trying to learn about it. Can you explain what the significance of reimbursement codes are for adoption?
They're everything. Investors can expect.
Enough said.
Yes. They expect an output, as they should.
Yes.
It really can make or break the adoption of a technology, because the big question is who's going to pay for that treatment option, right? And so there are the typical payers that exist today. So who can pay for it? If you are over 65, then the government could pay for it through Medicare, also through Medicaid. People have commercial insurance, so your commercial insurance can pay for a portion of it. It cannot be covered, and then who's paying for it? The actual patient themselves. And so the criticality of being able to have a right-sized reimbursement code is critical, because that's a massive barrier when you think
Yeah.
patients that are over 65 or people that are in their retirement stage. At that point, they're on a fixed income. So the expectation that somebody's going to pay for that out of pocket is hard. And there are copays with insurance as well too. And so whatever that copay is, whatever that burden is on the patient who already has a condition and is likely, paying for many other things to support that and their support structure, that's a hard ask. And so that reimbursement code and what level that is really, really important and is key from an adoption standpoint.
Very cool. Very cool. And then any advice that you would give a medtech company that's seeking a reimbursement code and is trying to identify or quantify a price point for their product? How do you sort of go about that?
Yes. So, I think there are a couple key aspects that that you should be looking at when you're trying to think about what a price point is. So one is certainly, what is the cost for you to actually create it? That is one of the key points that will always be looked at when you're trying to set price. I think the other piece is looking, what are the treatment options that are available, and where does that sit in that foray? So are there other things? There's a big difference in both the cost and the price when you think about the different treatment options, for example, for essential tremor.
Sure.
And I think you want to, when you're trying to set price, you want to look at what does it take to be able to serve the patient, not just that one point in time, but once a patient has your device or system, they're going to have it forever, right? Or you want them to, because you want them to be reaping the benefit of that. And so that needs to be accounted into it as well. And that's why, when I was mentioning before, our systems are more set up for this transactional singular view, when in reality, you are trying to treat a patient over their lifetime, and you're going to serve that patient over their lifetime, especially when you have a device that interacts with the patient every single day. And I think those are key aspects when you think about what is the cost to serve and then where you need to be able to set the price. Your investors certainly have an expectation of an output as well too.
Understood. And from what I understand, deep brain stimulation is not inexpensive, right? It's a very expensive and a very inconvenient modality. And you're bringing this to the patient in a democratized way. You're giving the benefit of deep brain stimulation into the patient's home without all the inconvenient factors of having their head cut open, right? So it's
And I don't want to discount, again, a little bit of love. I worked in DBS for a very long
time. For sure.
Extremely effective as well too. And for some patients, that might be the answer, is they need that chronic stimulation, day out. That may make sense for them. But I think others, that's not what they're looking for. And if you think about the cost to serve a patient, in that case, you're looking at a whole OR. There's a lot associated with that.
So it's kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, right? There's not a one size fits all, right? For every patient. Patients, the diseases themselves change over time. Patients are different. And so there are patients where deep brain stimulation works and is better suited. But what you're doing here is you're democratizing or expanding access to the benefits of deep brain stimulation, right? And addressing those I don't know if it's undiagnosed, but it's those that were undertreated, right? So the patients that were not historically treated for this because their disease wasn't severe enough for deep brain stimulation. And so they just went on living their life, unfortunately, in a way that where their disease affects their activities of daily living, right? So you've effectively democratized the access to this modality.
Yeah, you have patients that, like you said, they're either just falling out of the system
Yeah.
because the drugs aren't working for them, or they can't take them, and they feel hopeless that they have no other option. They have no desire to go to any type of whether it's a surgery or any procedure. And then you have also patients that are just undertreated because they
Undertreated. That's the word.
of their drugs. And it's sad to say, but the number of those patients is in the order of multi-millions.
Is that right? So it's a massive percentage of the patients, right? Yeah. 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 That's unfortunate.
As a society, we can do better.
I love it. No, I love it. Tell me a little bit about brand. So presumably you worked in environments where brand and user trust kind of go hand in hand, right? How does that play a role in how you operate Cala?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say for us at Cala, our true north is treating patients and making their lives better. If we can do that, then we have served a purpose. And I think brand is really important from the standpoint that people should know that that's what they should expect from Cala. I think that it's been exciting. This is the first time I've ever worked at an organization that has been the creator of a space. And I think that piece should mean a lot. That's what we want Cala to embody. It is the innovation. It is the day in and day out, we will fight for patients and to ensure that they get the treatment that they deserve. And so I think brand is very, very important for that. And so we're small, right?
Yeah.
We are a startup. So you won't see the same type of branding campaigns that occur within major, large med tech. But what you will see is that, we will stand by Cala, and that's what we want people to know, that's what we're focused on. We're not going to still just because we created a new space. It's not like, okay, great, we've created this product and great, we're just happy to sit here. We want to keep advancing this space, and I think there's so much opportunity to do that. Again, you and I talked about that a little bit earlier. Is there's so much opportunity within neurostimulation.
I love it. Let's talk about that for a moment. So let's talk about the future, right? How far can neuromodulation go? Like, can it replace all pharmaceuticals? Can it slowly erode at pharmaceuticals? What are your sort of predictions about how far it can go?
Yeah. So these are Deanna's predictions. So
perfect. I love it. I love it.
My personal opinion of it is, I don't think it fully replaces pharmacotherapy. But what I do think is that it is underutilized today. And I think the neuromodulation in general has the potential to treat so many more disease states than are treated today with it. To me, it's, you've heard that said before too. It's electricity is medicine. Our body is electrical. And neurostimulation can affect so many circuits within the brain itself, and and who defines what happens in our body, our brain. And so I really think the potential is massive. And it's been great to see over the past, 20 years that what has evolved so far. I would love it to go faster. And I think that goes back to what you and I were talking about is how do you set up regulations and a reimbursement pathway that make it easier for these innovations to take hold. We were the fastest to be able to get coverage. But that was a long battle, long before I came to Cala, that was in the mind of of the Cala founders already, is how do we do this? This is a totally new space. And I think that's what's exciting that you see in general with venture capital, right? That's the team that's funding and trying to push and adjust policy to make sure that it's keeping up with the innovation that occurs. So I think the potential is endless with neuromodulation. I don't think it's a full replacement because I think that you really have to, there are different ways to treat. Every disease state's different, every person is different, and it's typically a combination. But I think you should see it as a lot more adjunctive as fully replacing something.
Very interesting. That's very cool. Yeah. So standalone or in combination with something else. I love it. I love it. I want to switch gears a little bit on you and also advice you might have for other founders out there or CEOs of companies or aspiring CEOs. What advice would you give to another future Deanna Harshbarger? What advice would you give yourself, and would that same advice be what you would give to others?
So I think one is very basic. It's understand your true north, whatever that may be. At the end of the day, what do you want to have accomplished? And make sure that you stay clear with that. I think whether it's a founder or an aspiring CEO, make sure it can always be better.
Yeah. Yep.
It can always be better. No matter how far you think something has gotten, it can always be better. And so always take input, always take feedback. I think that is really, really important. Never be satisfied. And let's see here, trying to think what else. Now, I think if you stick with the true north and you find people.
That's right. Stay the course. It's all about staying the course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the advice I would give myself if I were younger. And it's the same thing I would tell any aspiring entrepreneur investor. What's in your mind, what is a common, universally accepted misunderstanding that founders have that you disagree with? What is something, let me rephrase the question. What is a common misconception that founders have that you disagree with? Whether it's about fundraising, whether it's about running a company, right? What is something you've, over your time as CEO, you had, let's say you had that perception and it's changed as a result of you leading this company. What does that look like?
Yeah. And I'm newer to the startup space. I think what was interesting is when I joined Cala, I would always hear, okay, once you close the round, then it's easy.
Good answer.
Starting.
Yeah.
It's like your bank account is full, then all of a sudden some,
fair enough.
Big wand appears and everything's perfect. I think that is a misconception. Like everybody is focusing on getting that seed money or that round. Yeah. And I think it's more about, you have to really think about what does it take to get to, where you are in your stage, like, is it commercialization to the end of your study? Like, beat that up. And people that have been there, done that. There's actually very little that we do. This is going to sound shocking because we're in like startup and innovation space. Very little that we do that hasn't been done before, but in some other form. So don't think that, just because you are an innovative company, you need to reinvent the wheel and everything. No, that's where I think you make sure that you have a team of people that have a variety of different experiences. Like when you asked me about a background in DTC, it's like, yes. And you know what? I have former colleagues and friends that I chat with that are CPG, packaged goods, right? Because there are things that you can learn, I think, in all these different spaces. So I think the misconception is like, if your bank account's full, all of a sudden the world is perfect. And that, if you're innovative, then you should be innovating in everything. It's like, no, actually don't make it hard for yourself. Make sure you're leveraging where you can and focus on those key things that are new.
That's awesome. No, that's well said. I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think we used to say that, getting the deal done in retrospect was easy. It's helping to build business. And again, if you're the entrepreneur, that's taking that to the next level. I can't, it's been a long time since I was a founder. So knowing the day to day is far gone, but it is the money in the bank is just the start of it. And that's what it should be, right? Like that's why we do what we do. We want to help entrepreneurs build businesses with the money, right? That's our ultimate goal here. So I love that. Well said. Well said. What is one last question here for you, and then we're off to the races. But if you had a magic wand, right, and you could solve one healthcare problem overnight, what would that be?
Ooh, I love that one. I think it might be too broad, and you might tell me I'm cheating.
No such thing. No such thing.
If I had one wand, I wish that every single patient could be looked at as a holistic patient instead of sent to 30 or 40 different specialists and different doctors and transferred across. Um, I think when you look at the way that our healthcare system is set up today, wouldn't it be nice to go to one single place and
Hmm.
treated holistically as opposed to all of these different pieces? Because, um, you know, the human body is very complex. I say we're like a car, and when something's wrong, you feel like you're going to the mechanic. Well, let's try this. Let's try that.
Yeah.
And you're sent to all these different specialists. And wouldn't that be great if we could take each family member and send them to one place and they could be treated holistically?
That's cool. So are you saying that begs another question? I'm sorry, I'm going to cheat now. But does that beg the question that we need to change our service model? Or is this something technology can solve in your mind?
I actually think technology can solve this.
Cool. Yeah.
Really,
Very cool.
And again, it goes back to that shift. And then how do we get the rules and regulations to tie to this to this evolution? Because we now
Very
have
cool.
the ability to bring going back to the question about data, bring all that data together.
Hmm. Is this something that AI can address in your mind, or is it more of like a data fluidity thing or a data access issue?
I think it's both. I think it's
Okay.
both. I think AI has a part. I think how we talk about AI has different definitions. Like algorithms have been around forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the data that you have in it.
Mhm.
So I think it's to some extent there. And then it's certainly how do you get that data together, because it's in all different places and forms. We still have an antiquated data system in our healthcare system. There's still places
Yeah.
to send faxes and have paper files still.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, we're opening up a can of worms
I
now.
know.
But is this yeah, this is starting to get really interesting discussion here. But is this where sort of the epics of the world can help, you think? Like electronic medical records, and
Yeah.
how do you sort of, how does Cala, or how do you think, what needs to change to make this a reality in your mind?
Yeah. So on the Cala side, we can operate in the system that exists. And again, our true
Yeah.
north is focusing on the treatment and the outcome, of that patient. But the easier we make it for the physician and the patient to be able to have data, again, actionable data that's valuable to them, that's important. And then they can, again, within the confines of the system, determine how they want to share that data more broadly, right? They're
Hmm.
typically seeing a neurologist. But on the broader scale, it certainly would, whether it is an Epic type system. I mean, honestly, it's more thinking holistically across
Yeah.
different specialties, because it goes back to what payer types are there, who's going to pay for what, and how those systems are tied together. And we have privatized healthcare, we have some government healthcare, we have all different types, and those don't allow the crossing of that data. So whether like an Epic type system or something should allow the crossing of that data so that you can look
Yeah.
at the patient holistically. But now you're asking people to transfer files from one place to another.
Correct. Does this mean the reinvention or the reintroduction of the personal health record in your mind? Is that part of what you're thinking about here?
Again, these are Deanna's opinions, and
Perfect. No, this is great. This is what everyone wants to hear.
I think it would be, right. I would love to be able to have all of my data in one place.
Me too.
Not
Me too. Yeah.
So I would have an expert look at that to evaluate it, but to have it in one singular place. And technically we have a right to our data, right? But that's a lot of effort to go and get and pull that. And then it typically comes physically. And so there's a place to have that. So again, I think it even goes back to what rules and regulations do you have in place? Because if you have that data, that also becomes a very critical security factor as well, too, right? That's personal data and information and how well that is held. And so who's going to take that burden on? Because how do they monetize that if that's not supported by a regulation standpoint?
100%, 100%. And I think if I understand correctly, this is a role Cala plays in many ways, right? You are aggregating data, you're introducing real world evidence and outcomes data that has never been available, quite frankly, right? So does Cala play a role in trying to reintroduce that data into the electronic medical record, or is it too much data for the clinician to digest? How do you all think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think as it is, it's too much for them to digest.
Too much, yeah.
Back to like what is actionable for them, because if you think about a physician, any physician, their day is so full. You're talking 15-minute slots, 30-minute slots with a patient, and you shouldn't have an expectation that they sort through all of that data themselves, right? More of like, it's our job to sort through that and give to them what is valuable for them that's actionable for them. Are they going to treat their patient any differently with that data?
Very cool.
That's what we want to serve up to them.
Awesome. Who, look, the last 5 years has been the startup game for you, which is awesome. And your career has changed so much because of it, I'm sure. Who is someone that you look up to in this field, and why?
I don't think it's one singular person, to be honest. I think, and maybe it's just my personal philosophy. I look at every person that I interact with, and I think to myself, what can I learn here? And I think mindset that I have. And so for me, I love speaking with multiple people that have either been in startup, either been in large multi-cap, that are in VC. I look at it and say, the more knowledge base and information that we have, the better we can make a decision or determine what to do. So I know that's a very broad answer, but there's no singular person that I'd look at and say, oh, this is, I want to be this person, or this is the person I look towards. I think it's more when we do board meetings, I want to hear from our board, and I love that they're, what have you seen in other portfolio companies? What work well or not work well? Can I find somewhere else that's analogous and look at that, going back to like not, reinventing the wheel. So I would say from that standpoint, I look at many people to be to look at and say, okay, this is what I want to get from this. And then I would say, there are always a couple people in your career that you say, that's the way I want to act. I think
awesome
is really important is, who do you look at and say, who is a true leader, who can get outcomes from people, and what are the things that they do to do that? And to me, it all goes back to the side of humanity.
I love it. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's people I've met over my career where I'm like, I wish this is how I could think.
Yeah.
I love the way that person thinks. And then other people I'm like, I wish I could act like that, like outwardly, right? Present myself in that way, right? And I think I that's a very healthy outlook, very holistic, as you mentioned earlier. So I like that. That's a very cool thing. So kind of wrapping up now, wanted to ask you just a quick personal question around you're in the high stakes game, right? You've got lots of stakes on the line here. How do you stay grounded? What do you do to sort of decompress?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think there's always, always family, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that's one of the key things is it just puts everything into perspective. So I happen to have two amazing children, a wonderful partner, and they always keep me in check.
In check. I love it.
What my daughter said every day was, she's always working. Role model. It is role model. That's what I tell myself. But no, I think that's always puts it in perspective. A couple weekends ago, I hosted a slumber party for a bunch
Awesome.
of 11-year-olds. That's perspective.
Cool. That is perspective. Leadership skills really kick into gear with that, right?
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. No, look, Deanna, it was awesome having you on the podcast. I'd love to give you sort of the final words to our listeners out there. Tell us your kind of final thoughts, any words of wisdom for them, and then give us some context of how people can reach out to you in case they decide to reach out.
Absolutely. No, I very much appreciated this. I'm grateful that you gave me some time. And my advice then, whether it is a founder or CEO of a startup, is, keep looking forward, because everything that you are doing is going to have an impact for people. And so no single person has the right answer, the only answer. And so be humble, make sure that you're going and getting that advice, because that's what's going to make it successful, is having not one person behind it, but a crowd of people behind it.
I love it. Very consistent with what you said earlier, and I this is a great conversation. Where can people follow your work? Can they reach out on LinkedIn? Where are some places they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn. So Deanna Harshbarger. And so they are more than welcome to reach out there. If somebody has your contact information and you pass them along, that would be great too. So I am more
Awesome.
happy to speak to others. Pay it forward.
Awesome.
Many people that have spoken to me.
I love it. I love it. Deanna, thank you so much for your time. Pleasure having you, and look forward to helping you build Cala, take it to the next level.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great one. Bye-bye.